On January 3rd, 2026, in just a matter of hours, the geopolitical map of the Americas was fundamentally redrawn. A socialist experiment that had really defined the region for 2 decades came to this incredibly sudden, very dramatic end. So today, we're going to unpack how years of digital warfare and geopolitical maneuvering all led to this one moment, the final, shocking collapse of the pink tide.
It all began in the dead of night. At 2 a.m., explosions start rocking the Venezuelan coast as air defenses are just systematically taken out. Less than an hour later, with Caracas plunged into a total blackout, elite special forces are already on the ground. Their target? Fort Tiduna, the very heart of the regime's cower. And in just over 2 hours, the head of the state was captured. Before the sun even came up, it was already over. This operation was really a masterclass in modern multi-domain warfare. This wasn't just boots on the ground. You had the 160th SOAR, the Night Stalkers, delivering assault teams under the cover of darkness. You had stealth fighters like F-35s creating a safe corridor in the sky. And absolutely crucially, you had U.S. Cyber Command hitting the kill switch on the city's power grid. It was like a digital key that unlocked the physical door for the ground forces, a perfect and terrifying synthesis of cyber and kinetic power. But, a strike this decisive, this surgical, it doesn't just happen in a vacuum. The military action was really just the final explosive step. The groundwork, the true unraveling of the regime, had been happening for years, and not on a battlefield, but on servers and spreadsheets. So what was it? What was the digital trigger that finally made this physical strike possible?
Well, that brings us to the OSINT offense. Now, for those who aren't familiar, OSINT stands for Open Source Intelligence. It's basically the art of using publicly available data, things you or I could find online, to uncover hidden truths. In this case, a small army of investigative journalists and analysts waged a digital war that just systematically dismantled the Maduro regime's legitimacy, brick by brick. The core of this digital war was exposing what our source material calls a double discourse. While the regime was out there publicly preaching anti-imperialism and socialism, its key figures were privately behaving like the very capitalists they claimed to hate. And you better believe investigators were watching their every move online. A perfect example of this was the Miami Nostro investigation. This is brilliant. Using a bot to scan thousands of official government records, researchers cross-referenced names with Florida's Public Business Registry, and the findings were just stunning. Hundreds of military members and former government officials with companies registered in Florida. At the very same time, you had schemes like the CLAP food program, run by figures like Alex Saab, allegedly being used to funnel hundreds of millions of dollars through the U.S. financial system. The hypocrisy was just laid bare for the entire world to see. But while all that financial corruption was incredibly damaging, the real kill shot to the regime's credibility wasn't financial. It was mathematical. The final proof, the thing that cemented international opinion against the regime, came from a simple, cold analysis of the 2024 election results. 1 in 100 million. Just let that number sink in for a moment. That was the statistical probability of the official 2024 election results occurring naturally. It was, for all intents and purposes, a mathematical impossibility. And here's how they got caught. The fraud was almost amateurish in its arrogance. Analysts discovered the regime started with the percentage they wanted, let's say 51.2%, and then they worked backward to invent the vote totals. The numbers were just too perfect, matching the rounded percentages to the 6th decimal place. They weren't counting votes, they were just filling in a spreadsheet. So, with Maduro gone, the story pivots. The removal of the head of the Venezuelan state was like pulling the kingpin from a whole row of dominoes. All of that financial and oil support that was propping up allied nations across the region, poof, vanished overnight. And that triggered an immediate and catastrophic chain reaction. And the first and hardest hit was Cuba. For years, the island's economy had depended on a steady stream of about 27,000 barrels of Venezuelan oil. Every single day. After the intervention, that flow went from 27,000 barrels to 0. The lifeline was just cut. And the impact was absolutely devastating. Without fuel, the country just ground to a halt. Universities and state offices shut down. Public transport stopped running. And with no fuel for tractors, agricultural production completely collapsed, leading to severe food shortages. Cuba was plunged into a state of what analysts called terminal decline. Meanwhile, in Bolivia, a totally different crisis erupted. The price of diesel fuel skyrocketed by 162%. Can you imagine that? It sparked massive, widespread unrest. This wasn't an energy blockade like in Cuba. This was the direct result of a financial cutoff. The Venezuelan subsidies that had kept fuel affordable for years were just gone overnight.
So this created a tale of two very distinct, but related, crises. In Cuba, the sudden energy blockade led to total economic paralysis and a humanitarian disaster. But in Bolivia, the financial cutoff sparked mass social unrest and deep political instability as the government was forced to get rid of those subsidies. Two different symptoms, but from the exact same core event.
You know, the collapse wasn't just economic or political, it was ideological. The entire institutional framework that was built to support 21st century socialism, this dream of a post-hegemonic Latin America free from U.S. influence, it began to just evaporate almost instantly. And that institutional collapse was incredibly swift. By April 2026, we're talking just a few months after the raid, the entire architecture of regional socialism was in ruins. Organizations like ALBA and Petrocaribe, which were once the pillars of this whole movement, were either defunct or suspended. Without the constant flow of Venezuelan oil and cash, their entire reason for being simply ceased to exist. And into this vacuum stepped a new, much more assertive U.S. foreign policy. It's been dubbed the Trump corollary. At its core, it's a return to U.S. hegemony, using military presence to secure supply chains and, critically, to block competitors like Russia and China from getting a foothold on strategic assets in the hemisphere. The era of a multipolar Our America was officially over. So this all leads us to the new reality that's taking shape, a brand new hemispheric order. The big ideological battles of the pink tide have basically been replaced by a much more transactional, pragmatic, and you could even say cynical era of resource-driven realism. And probably the most strategic pivot of all came from the U.S. itself. Instead of backing the opposition leader who likely won the 2024 election, Washington recognized Maduro's own vice president, Delcy Rodriguez. This sent a really clear signal. They preferred stability and oil flow over a messy, unpredictable democratic transition, a model that analysts are now calling adaptive authoritarianism. And this realignment was just incredibly swift and transactional. The U.S. recognizes the new president, diplomatic ties are reestablished, and almost immediately a massive 50 million barrel oil deal is signed. In return, the new Venezuelan government gets a $300 million cash infusion. It wasn't about ideology, it was a business deal, plain and simple, designed to stabilize the state and secure resources. But here's the thing. This surgical strike created a whole new, and maybe even more chaotic, set of dangers. See, removing the head of the state didn't remove the criminal networks that were deeply embedded within it. Powerful groups like the Tren de Aragua just adapted, shifting to illegal mining and human trafficking. Armed factions started competing for territory, raising the risk of a long, drawn-out insurgency. The state was stabilized at the top, but it became fragmented and incredibly dangerous just below the surface. And this brings us to our final, lingering question. The intervention definitely achieved its short-term goals, a change in leadership and the stabilization of oil supplies. But it leaves us to wonder if this new model, achieving stability through a rapid, forceful decapitation strike, is a sustainable blueprint for the hemisphere. What kind of precedents have been set, and what new instabilities might arise from this new order?